I've never been to Lisbon before, and what a great opportunity.
Please present on this.
That's mine.
The other one, the third one.
Sure. So I hope that you enjoyed the little big break. If you have not, I'm sorry for you guys. Getting green. It's not working. He could have done this for me. I'm a little bit lost as well. This is the weather affecting me.
Recording in progress.
Okay, guys. So we are starting the new panel. We have now Julian here next to me. So as we are a little bit late, I will invite him to present himself and also to start with his presentation, right? So the stage is yours.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Julian. I'm with the Oxford Center of Socio-Legal Studies. My discipline is socio-legal studies and research, which is at the intersection of law and sociology. For this presentation, based on the great work I've seen so far and the interests of the people that are here, I've made my presentation more about the theoretical and sociological findings of this research, but if you're interested in sort of the more practical legal and political findings, I invite you to ask me that in the Q&A. I'd love to talk about it, and there is so much to be said. All right. So it's time to talk about sex in public. Now, in London, there are dozens of nightlife venues where queer people can go for safe, consensual, spontaneous, and fun sex. Whether these are gay saunas, where men can hook up amongst steam rooms and jacuzzis, or queer raves and club nights with a dark room in the back for consensual sexual encounters. There are dozens of these across London. There have been for decades, and they are a staple of London's queer nightlife economy. In my research, I refer to these as a category as queer sex on premises sites. Basically, what this means are sites, and that can be either permanent, like a gay sauna, where they have their venue and it's there all of the time, or these can be episodic and ephemeral, like a bi-weekly rave that has a darkroom in the back, or a monthly party where queer people can go and seek this out. So it's a site of all sorts where there is a designated space within that for consensual sexual encounters, and these places are made by and for the LGBTQ community. These places have a tumultuous history in London. This is a newspaper clipping from 1726 where you can see Some people were convicted of, quote, keeping a disorderly house in Westminster for the entertainment of sodomites. And they were sentenced to stand at the pillory, which was a form of physical torture, and then to prison. This is a debate in Parliament from 1984, where members of Parliament decided that these places counted as public space, even though they were private venues with some sort of entry needed, because they wanted the regulatory power of the government to extend in them so they could control what was going on there. But now, in 2024, these places are much more open and visible about their existence. They sell tickets online, they have visible social media presences, they talk to the press, and they advertise what they have openly. This is a Instagram story from one of these sites in London where they're showing off their darkroom that they're setting up, saying, this is what you can expect if you come to our event tonight, and if you don't have your ticket yet, you can buy it at the door. In my research, I was concerned with three big questions. First, why does the state care about what sex you have and where you have it? Second, what are the legal conditions that these sites face? And then what do those legal conditions and how these sites are treated say about sexual morality, individual rights, and the law in London and elsewhere? To talk about some of the theoretical underpinnings, this work was largely instructed by Thinking Sex by Gail Rubin. In that work, Rubin sets up this theory of the charmed circle, which you can see here. The inner circle are types of sex that are considered to be good and normal and moral. Sex that is heterosexual between married people, that is for the purposes of procreation, that hasn't been purchased, that doesn't involve pornography or toys or any sort of kink or fetish. On that outer circle are sexual practices which are considered to be deviant and bad and immoral. Sex that violates those norms that are in that inner circle, that doesn't subscribe to them. And then she also talks about the threat that they are perceived as posing to society, a sort of domino effect, where if you begin to tolerate some of these deviant sexual practices, you'll eventually end with the moral collapse of society as a whole. And you've probably heard of something like this before. Well, if we start allowing homosexuality, then people are going to want to have sex with animals and then with children, and we're going to have the collapse of the nuclear family. And at the end of it, we're going to be so deteriorated as a society, we're going to fall into total anarchy. All because we started by allowing the wrong type of sex. And I pair these with theories on compulsory heterosexuality, compulsory monogamy, and compulsory matrimony and coupledom, to show that there is a narrow set of sexual practices that in our society are uplifted as both a cultural and spiritual ideal, and then those are legally privileged and inscribed into law as just sort of the default correct way of being. London has a long history of laws intended to uphold that narrow set of practices. This is a short list of them. And you might notice that all of these are laws that criminalize behavior and that are then enforced through prosecution. But in my research, I'm actually interested in a different sort of regulation, and that is business licensing. So London is divided into all these different boroughs. So within the city, kind of these neighborhoods and regions that then have their own local authorities that are responsible for some of the governance within that part of the city. Local authorities in London are responsible for business licensing, so getting those licensing applications, approving them, and then maintaining the regulation and enforcement of those licensing conditions. There's a category of licensing in the English and Welsh legal system for sex establishments. This is a category that is meant to cover sex stores, sex cinemas, and sexual entertainment venues, which are lap dance clubs and strip clubs. But the way that this category is written at the national statutory level actually delegates a lot of authority to these local authorities to decide how they want these places to be treated. And that's a very intentional choice. So you can see in the statute that it uses a lot of vague terminology, like saying that in a relevant locality, these local authorities can determine the appropriate number of sex establishments that is appropriate for that locality. So they can set, basically what that means is they can set a maximum for how many sex establishments they want to allow in any part of the city. And that number is allowed to be 0. So what we have as a result of this is across the 20 boroughs of London, every borough does it a little bit differently. It's completely inconsistent across the city. Just to give you an example, I've put up 2 on the board, Camden and Westminster. Camden has said that the appropriate number of sex establishments is 0. They don't think any are appropriate in the neighborhoods. They don't think there is a single location where it's okay to have one of these sex establishments. And when determining the character of the locality, so what factors they consider in making that determination of 0, they have a whole list of factors that include, it can't be near facilities frequented primarily by women, places of worship, transport hubs, hospitals and medical facilities, tourist areas, and so on. Westminster allows a little bit more. The neighborhood of Soho gets 16, and if you're familiar with Soho, that might make some sense to you of why that area gets some. 2 other neighborhoods each get 1, but the rest of Westminster gets 0. And they have a different list of what factors they consider in making that determination. And so just everywhere, every borough, no 2 are doing it exactly alike. I also found that although boroughs have published their written guidance that makes those determinations, there's not even consistency within a borough and how this is being enforced. So on the board now, I have what their policy says is the maximum number of sex establishments they can have, but then I also have the real number of sex establishments in the borough. And all of the ones highlighted in red actually allow more sex establishments. They have allowed more to open than their policies purport. So Camden, which, as we just saw, has a policy of 0, actually does have 3 sex establishments in their borough. Westminster has 22, far beyond what their maximum limit is. And there are other boroughs that, again, without explanation, have allowed these to open. So even though it is actually seemingly in favor of sex establishments in reality, there's no clarity on why they've allowed some to open and not others, and why they've allowed to open some at all. So what does this mean for the places I study, queer sex on premises sites? Well, actually, at first glance, it appears quite simple. In England and Wales, we have the common law legal system, and it has this principle that everything which is not forbidden is allowed. That means if there is no law saying that something is illegal, you can presume that conduct is legal. Now, sex in and of itself, when it is consensual and unpaid, is not a licensable activity. And according to the definition that the statute puts out, there aren't sex stores, they aren't sex cinemas, they aren't strip clubs. Nothing in the definitions applies clearly to sex establishments. So you would think there's nothing wrong with these sites. They should be allowed to operate legally without any regulations on their conduct, and they're not caught up by the licensing. However, that's not what we're seeing. In the last few years, boroughs have cracked down on queer sex on premises sites, trying to either eliminate them from their boroughs or minimize their presence as much as possible. This is a newspaper article from 2022 where you can see the borough of Tower Hamlets tried to shut down 2 of these sex-positive parties that are queer sex on premises sites, citing that government act from 1982, and that is what we looked at before, the one that sets up the sex establishment licensing category. So to give you an example of how this is playing out, I'm going to now discuss Club Verboten, which is a queer sex on premises site. It's a bi-weekly queer kink and fetish party that's been operating in Tower Hamlets for a number of years. It has thousands of members, and it's been running for almost a decade now. So although it had run in the borough for quite a few years without any issue, they actually in 2022 received a letter from the Tower Hamlets Council that actually, although the letter was about something else entirely, you can see the venue at the end gets a warning from the borough saying it appears that these events fall within that definition as put forward by that statute. Therefore, because you don't have a sexual entertainment venue license, you are violating the law by having unlicensed sexual entertainment, and saying that they needed to cease having these parties immediately. So Club Verboten then tries to reach out and start conversation with the borough, trying to figure out why now all of a sudden are they being cracked down on. It seems impossible for them to obtain a sexual entertainment venue license because they are not a sex store, cinema, or strip club. So there's no way they can actually meet the conditions of any of those because it just simply isn't what they are. But the borough refuses to talk to them for a number of months and just sort of rebuffs all of their advances and says, well, that's just sort of the way it is. Then Club Verboten learns that there are straight swingers clubs in Tower Hamlets that haven't gotten any sort of warning from the borough, even though they also don't have sexual entertainment venue licenses, and therefore have the same qualities that should be making them purportedly unlicensed sexual entertainment. So Club Verboten begins organizing, and they get their thousands of members to send Freedom of Information Act requests to the borough, asking for clarity on this. And legally, if a borough receives a Freedom of Information Act request, they are obligated to respond. They have to respond. So suddenly they've flooded Tower Hamlets with hundreds of messages they have to respond to. That prompts the council to reach back out to Club Verboten, saying, okay, let's figure something out, and please make these emails stop. And that leads Club Verboten to apply for a premises license variation, which means they get a hearing before the council to try to figure this out. I had the opportunity to interview with one of the lead organizers of Club Verboten, and he had a lot to say, but I thought this quote was quite informative. Describing this experience, trying to get a dialogue started with Tower Hamlets, he says, I got so frustrated in realizing there is something else. They just don't want to talk about it. They just want to shut us down. There was a point where they almost tried to puzzle together different acts in order to find a reason for us not to be legal. That was the point where I realized, okay, this was not about licenses. This was not about wanting to do something good for people and keeping them safe and making sure they have a good experience and be reasonable and sensible operators. This is just about moral views, really. So in July, Tower Hamlets and Club Verboten has their hearing. And so a big issue, there were a few issues, but a big issue in the hearing was this question of, do they need a sexual entertainment venue license? Well, to answer that question, you need to be able to answer, does what happens at a queer sex on premises site fall under that definition of sexual entertainment? The definition of sexual entertainment is a live display of nudity for the purpose of sexually stimulating an audience. So now you have to be able to answer the question, is public sex a performance? If it is, then this is licensable conduct and they need to get a license. If it's not, you don't need a license. So the Club Verboten actually prevailed, got Tower Hamlets to walk back their warning, and Tower Hamlets did not require Club Verboten to seek a sexual entertainment venue license. Although they didn't explicitly answer whether public sex is a performance, that remains an unsettled question. This does seem to be an implicit recognition that what goes on at a site like Club Verboten is not licensable conduct and isn't sexual entertainment. It also is a remarkable act of resistance on the part of Club Verboten, where when confronting the borough with this ambiguity, they actually did get the borough to concede and say, you're right, this is really ambiguous and we don't feel like we actually can make you do this. So returning to Rubin's Charm Circle, I find that it explains what happens here quite nicely. Club Verboten represents all sorts of transgressive, so-called deviant, bad sexual practices. It is promiscuous, it is sadomasochistic and based on fetish, and it is involving queer people. We can presume from the ways that Tower Hamlets treated Club Verboten, especially compared to how it treated the straight swingers clubs, that Club Verboten was perceived as some sort of threat to the moral fabric of the neighborhood, something that needed to be eliminated from the borough. And then the law became that instrument for the state to intervene and say, well, you know, the lever here that we're going to use to regulate you is going to be the licensing statutes. And then this question of, do they need a license, actually, I think has some fascinating implications around the way that sex and public sex, our attitudes towards it, specifically when it comes to the performativity of it and the agency of the people involved. Because if you believe that public sex is a performance, what that does is it revokes the agency of the people in that environment and says that what they are doing in that space, what effect they are having on others, is what this all depends on. So for example, if you take a man who's walking around nude in a gay sauna, that is a live display of nudity for the purpose of sexually stimulating these onlookers because he's cruising in the sauna. He may be posing suggestively, he's taking off his towel, he's trying to get a reaction or have some kind of impact. But it also means that maybe there's a gay man who's walking around nude in the sauna and he doesn't have any intention of having sex. Maybe he just likes being nude and socializing with other gay men. Under this framework, that doesn't matter. It is still a live display of nudity that can arouse onlookers and therefore is caught under the licensing category. And then when I talked with interviewees about sort of the counter to this, including licensing barristers who specialized in this, this idea that the way you get around this is by reframing public sex as something that is primarily for the enjoyment of the people having it, where yes, they may be having it in a public space, but it's really about the people enjoying it for themselves. They are having sex there for their own pleasure. They are getting off on it with whoever they're having it with. It's not about the other people. Therefore, it is not a performance. It is for their own enjoyment. And that does seem to be a good counter to this, and one that in the Club Verboten hearing had some persuasive qualities to it. However, it's interesting to me that the most viable legal strategy in this case is the one that tries to reject as much as possible that people go and have sex in public because they enjoy being around others. There's a reason people go to these spaces. I think anyone who goes will tell you that there's a reason they go rather than just having, sex at home behind closed doors. But in order to make this a legally viable strategy, we all just sort of have to pretend that's not the case in order to make it as palatable to our societal norms and the norms that are inscribed in our legal system as much as possible. All right, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have also a participation online. So Lucia,
hi.
Feel free to share your screen.
It's all in Portuguese.
I know.
Sorry.
Guys, you need to
So
learn.
So let me know when you can see me.
Can you start with the presenter's view, because we are seeing the different slides on the left. We would like to see the full screen.
Okay, great. And now?
Perfect. Please go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. So my presentation is a little bit different from the ones that I have witnessed, mostly because it's not really about policy. It's a bit more speculative, and it's about a genre that really interests me because it's let's say, what I will call a virtual genre, and I will explain what I mean by that. And it's a genre that is associated with the queer community because it originated in a queer party in New York, but has since migrated mostly online and offers new strategies of resistance. And so in my presentation, I try to address these strategies and also to perhaps question what the genre perhaps forgets to consider or leaves behind. So the paper examines how some queer electronic musicians in particular have developed virtual strategies that enable new forms of identity expression and community building. And I think this is very similar to some underground rave scenes of the 1990s and also some underground music scenes from the early 2000s. But this genre in particular is fundamentally shaped and mediated by the possibilities of the digital. So the genre has many names, and I have decided to follow that given by Matthew Phillips, who wrote on Mixtapes in 2015 and called it neo-futurist. So the genre draws upon aesthetics of cyberpunk fiction and also science fiction, and much of its aesthetics is very speculative. There's a lot of intersection between the music and also virtuality, and I posit, following the research that I have conducted, that it offers queer artists a means to explore new narratives about identity and technology. So in my project, which is mostly a bibliographic project, I have also interviewed some artists who identify with this genre, and they have termed their practice in terms of world building, which is a term that comes from video game discourse, but has been adapted to this kind of music for mainly 3 reasons. So many artists within this genre identify as queer, and also the music often explores themes of intersectionality, and I will explain where that comes from. On the sonic side, the genre is very innovative because it comprises very complex sound design, heavy genre meshing, so meshing of different other genres, loud mixes, a very wide stereo field, organic drum samples, pitched up vocals, and beats that elude conventional time signatures so as to sound deconstructed. And the tracks are often accompanied by futuristic video art that merges the imaginative possibilities of video game environments with the cacophony of digital music textures. And often this is conducted through, for example, 3D aesthetics. So I will play one track that can give you an idea of the genre. It's by Fatima Al-Qadiri, who is a Kuwaiti artist and is one of the first people who actually explored this genre. The only thing is, okay. Let me know if you can see it, if you can see and hear the video. Otherwise, I can just play it from YouTube.
We can see the video, but also we have a little problem with your micro that constantly is making a weird noise. So if you can check your micro, it will be good as well. So please go ahead and play the video.
Yeah, it's just that the video doesn't seem to be loading. If I share it via YouTube, does it still work? Can you still see it?
Let's try.
Okay. Sorry about this. Let's see from here.
Otherwise, you can always share the link through the chat and people can check it.
Sorry?
If you cannot play the video on YouTube, you can share the link and we can move forward.
I can link it to you.
Sure.
Ah, okay, sorry, okay.
Guys, I'm going to play this video, right?
Okay, yeah, yes, please.
E chorar ao mesmo tempo. Está tudo bem. Dançar como se não houvesse amanhã. Está tudo bem.
So maybe if you can stop the video now.
You can. Go ahead, continue.
Can you still hear me?
We can.
Okay, perfect. So I decided to choose this video because it encapsulates some of the elements of the neo-futurist genre. And these three elements that I just noted should be thought of not as distinct, but they should be thought of in terms of an interaction between the three. So the intersectionality of the identity positions of these artists feeds into the complexity of their sonic experimentation, which is aptly characterized by genre meshing, as well as often disruptive sound design. This should then be reflected in the artworks that accompany these tracks, which are informed by the aesthetic imaginaries of current cyberpunk and posthuman narratives through an exploration of contemporary creative technologies. So in the case of, for example, Vatican Vibes, you could see that there was a very decentrist perspective. You didn't see humans, you just saw some aerial images. And I think this is quite interesting because it creates the anthropomorphized perspective. So in fact, according to Phillips, each of these works suggests a new reading of human relationships with technology and a new approach to the possibilities available to our species. This neo-futurist aesthetic, in its manipulation of time, space, and the subject against a backdrop of technological innovation and domination, posits new approaches to the future, contrary to those of past avant-gardes and current technocratic and transhumanist philosophies. Against the status quo of progress and alienation, these artists explore new worlds, and in this process begin to reorient and transform the shape of this one. So while it is difficult to identify a clear birthplace to the neo-futurist genre, mostly because it comes from a conjunction between different events in at the end of the 2000s and at the beginning of the 2010s. It is mostly circulated online, and its proponents mostly identify as digital nomads. However, much of its aesthetics was influenced by a series of queer parties that happened between 2009 and 2014 in New York under the name Ghetto Gothic. So the party was founded in 2009 by DJ Shane Oliver and DJ VínCulos, a Dominican-born female DJ whose vision was, I quote, to create a glamorous, fashion-friendly, art-friendly freak fest where everyone was friendly and everyone felt cool. The party was attended by some of the early pioneers of neo-futurist music, such as experimental electronic musicians Lotic and Arca, and alternative rapper Mickey Blanco. Crucially, the party received consecration by high art magazines such as Days and ID for its intersectionality, which manifested on at least two different levels. So first, VínCulos explains that the party was diverse, very gay, very women-friendly, Afrocentric, diasporic, and that if you looked at all the lineups, we predominantly hired people of color who were queer and who were women. This was then reflected in the music that the party promoted, where, I quote, A$AP Rocky and Sisti Nobby's Bounce played next to alternative rap at a party where the rappers were in fact gay and proud, followed by club and bass music, not just from Jersey and Baltimore and Chicago and Miami, but from the rest of the world. So this party's ability to create a safe space for queer people and people of color, the experimental mixing techniques it inspired, what Al-Khaliri made with her video and her track, and its futurist aesthetics, where Gothic imagery blended with desert symbols, collectively inspired a wave of albums that by the mid-2010s defined the quintessentially queer electronic music genre. So Chino Amobi's Paradiso perhaps stands as the pinnacle of this movement, and it's the next track that I would like to play to you.
Where death hath reared himself a throne in a strange city,
We cannot see it. Hello? We cannot see it.
Far down in the dim west.
Sorry?
We cannot see it.
Sorry?
We cannot see
Ah.
it.
Okay.
Perhaps you can
Okay.
share the links and we can
So
watch
I'll
it
share it.
afterward. Because for the best of the time management, it would be important to advance.
Okay, sorry. So this work ticks all the boxes that Phillips identifies when speaking about neo-futurist music. The world-building capacity of this video is brought about by the following artistic strategies. 3D immersive design, which serves to create parallel versions of reality where different counter-hegemonic narratives can be explored. Shifting points of view, typical of role-playing video games, but used in such a way as to de-anthropomorphize the main narrative viewpoint, as in Fatima Al-Qadiri. An exploration of alternative identities through avatars that blend elements of the human with elements of the post-human in a narrative but dissonant sound design, which is organic yet alien samples. So all that reimagines technology for artistic and aesthetic purposes, challenging conventional uses, and queering traditional storytelling techniques through sonic cacophony. What's nevertheless striking about this track and other neo-futurist tracks is how they diverge from the typical sound of queer music, such as disco and house, which are driven mostly by rhythm and centered on bodily liberation. Instead, this piece emphasizes the low end of the frequency spectrum. It has dark, unsettling textures and offers little space for dancing or for liberation. Although it certainly elicits physical responses, it still really seems to lie in a textural terrain, reliant as it is on a chain of extra musical signifiers. Moreover, the conceptual complexity of this artwork places Amobi in a matrix of high cultural and subcultural power, which accords him a very privileged capacity to speak the language of the here and now, in spite of the radically progressive politics he is attempting to promote. While the possibility of articulating different narratives can be empowering for queer individuals, his capacity to articulate these experiences into notably intricate and transmedia artworks implies an access to the tools and lingo that make these articulations reach a threshold of visibility. So it is no coincidence that Ghetto Gothic, from which Amobi originated and also Al-Qadiri originated, was in New York and was frequented and shaped by individuals well-versed in the discourse of art institutions and influential enough to make significant contributions to it. So obviously the genre right now has evolved. It's very much an online genre and there are many iterations of it across the globe. But the interesting thing is that these iterations always come from specific locales, whether that be Singapore, Milan, London, New York, Berlin, but it seems like they do kind of travel and start from the capitals of culture. So this paper argues that the aesthetics and themes of neo-futurism embody a new form of authenticity rooted in the fluid boundaries between online and offline worlds, the genre's engagement with internet culture and also virtual culture, and the recombinant possibility of transmedia storytelling captures a distinctly post-internet sensibility that aligns with queer theory's dream of constantly queering fixed identities. However, this authenticity comes at a price, and I would like to know what you think about this, because the artists and communities driving this movement often hold privileged positions, come from or have lived in metropolitan centers, and offer resources and visibility, visibility necessary to engage with these complex questions. So in this context, lingering questions remain as to where and how countercultural imaginaries can be cultivated if both physical and digital spaces pose significant accessibility issues. This is my yeah, so I'll just try to find my references list, but yeah, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Ignacio. I never sent an introduction, but I'm currently doing a PhD in Berlin, critical party production, critical spatial nocturnal production. So yeah, the presentation is called VínCulos, Critical Party Production, the case of SinVergüenza and Discrecionn in Quito-Ecuador. Some learning and unlearning and knowledge in the past years has been mariconeando or queering as an artist under SinVergüenza. Together here, I know in Portuguese it's in Spanish. There's not an exact translation, but could be closer to queer in some way, but it's not like it's that's why I'm using queer. Through interdisciplinary collaborations with different artists, DJ sets, performances, installations, visual art, and more, SinVergüenza showed us that marica transfeminist night parties can have political and pedagogic role that allows spatial and knowledge co-production. Maricas and sexual dissidences in Abya Yala, or Latin America, sometimes talk about descolonizar the party, something like decolonizing the party. Requebra is a Brazilian artist and DJ based in Mexico City, and he says decolonizar means to speak from our ass or anus, to release all the decolonial energy we carry inside us to liberate our bodies and mind. Un ano soberano, a sovereignness, as Pachacur Collective has said. A way in which SinVergüenza proposed a more decolonial party was by hoping to co-produce new collective marica narratives, stories, imaginary presents, futures, memories, and local histories, often visualized by imperialist LGBTQ NGOs or gay parties. This flyer is one of the editions of SinVergüenza, and it alludes to a pre-colonial sculpture and the fact that some original cultures in Abya Yala or Latin America did not have a binary understanding of gender and sexuality. Another edition of SinVergüenza was held during Fiestas de Quito, hoping to question the narrative of this national holiday when the municipality of Quito celebrates the Spanish founding of the city as the date the town was born, ignoring the fact that Quito's name comes from Quito with a K, which was a major political and cultural center where the indigenous Quito people lived before the imposition of white supremacy, private property, Christianity, and colonial gender constructions took place through the exploitation and assassination, mass assassination of indigenous people. And a legacy of violence and inequality that persists today through different modern manifestations, where one of them is this cultural one of celebrating that date as the founding and the start of the city, right? The day of the Spanish founding. An edition of SinVergüenza took place during the 21st anniversary of the decriminalization of homosexuality in Ecuador. It was a struggle won in 1997, mainly led by brown trans women who have been invisibilized from hegemonic Ecuadorian history and corporate neoliberal imperialist gay narratives. The party questioned the idea that maricas have in fact been decriminalized today in Ecuador, since sexual dissidences continue to be criminalized and jailed for their skin color, for being poor, for unionizing, for migrating and crossing borders, for being HIV positive or requiring hormones, for carrying abortions, or for protecting the environment against multinational corporations. Parties extending beyond 4 a.m. are also informal and illegal, like SinVergüenza. And this is like a PS. Originally, it was until 2 a.m., but the city's first ever non-white mayor in a majority non-white city extended party closure until 4 a.m. A few months before he was ousted from office by the city council conservative majority. This was in 2019. Anyways, back to the main point, many maricas are therefore still portrayed as illegal in Ecuador. And that was what we were looking in this edition. During Orgullo, Pride, SinVergüenza organized an anti-marriage edition to imagine the possibility of expressing affection and care without the validation of an institution that reinforces constructions like nationality, borders, private property, inheritance, forced monogamy, and an historic discrimination based on race and gender. That year was when marriage equality was legalized in Ecuador, and it was the main demand from corporate gay NGOs in Pride for many years. Decolonizar Marica parties also involves generating vínculos or links, VínCulos or links with broader intersectional struggles. Specific editions of SinVergüenza touched issues like borders, together with Venezuelan immigrant artists, anti-neoliberal love of private property or possession on St. Valentine's Day, or were held in holidays like Semana Santa or Holy Week, all of which were banned online in now Meta social media, by Ecuadorian far-right fascist groups hoping to silence these political messages. It was a feminist hacker collective which always helped us to get the events back on social media. Marica nighttime spaces of sexual distance can also create vínculos among bodies, building encounters and communities that can reivindicate leisure, free time, joy, affection, care, and pleasure by dancing together, chatting, kissing, having sex together. Something that has been already explored but mainly in context of the global north, for example, by Ben Kampkin or Lo Marshall. These spaces must also be aware about socially constructed and oppressive notions of desire under a heteronormative, cisnormative, patriarchal, and white supremacist, ableist, ageist system. And what role Marica nighttime spaces can play in reproducing or dismantling these desires. Vínculos and collaborations in Marica nighttime spaces can take place among Marica artists and collectives beyond the hegemonic colonial institutions of creative production, like certain galleries and museums in Quito. Here is a flyer of SinVergüenza edition with London-based collective Maricumbia in 2018, January 2018. This one is with Diana, who co-founded Argentinian collective Hiedra, Club de Baile, and is now in Mexico. We had artistic and political collaborations with artists from the US, whose families migrated from Ecuador, as well as with artists from Brazil, Venezuela, or from Mexico, like DJ Guapis. Marica parties can therefore also generate geographic vínculos or links outside colonially inherited imperial serving divided national borders in Latin America. Lineups also include artists from different urban geographies in Ecuador outside of Quito, from smaller cities. Marica nighttime spaces can connect different art collectives and spaces in Avia Yala and beyond that also identify with transfeminist, anti-racist, and anti-neoliberal struggles. They must reflect about who they decide to give an artistic and political platform in the DJ lineup, since, as Requebra explains, DJs are not only transmitting sonic vibrations, but also a political message. Each time we breathe, dance, move, walk, and have sex, we stretch, tighten, and relax our anus. This anal stretching is sometimes conscious and sometimes unconscious. The act of conscious and unconscious stretching can involve the body and spaces, as well as practices that link both. So interdisciplinary Marica nocturnal spatial production also involves stretching practices from architecture to curatorship, music, dancing, visual art, and activism. Here's some shots from post-porn artist, Mario Mucho from Mexico, or different photographers like Gonzalo Abarca from Trueque Residencia Artística, or Guayaquil Collective. And SinVergüenza also included fanzines and posters from Las Comadres, a collective that does accompaniments in abortions, in addition alluding to the viral meme embodied territorial sovereignty. Different performances took place in most parties. Many times the bodies consciously dancing, moving the dance floor, as Monica Alarcón explains, blended as too. artist Fernando Alcantara reminds us, Maria, nights and spaces can destabilize the performativity of heteronormativity and cisnormativity. In 2019, how am I doing with time?
You have 5 minutes more.
In 2019, SinVergüenza was part of the transfeminist anti-capitalist system bloc during that year's Orgullo Pride in Quito. Together with other collectives and bodies, an alternative walk was proposed before joining the main march with different important public spaces for sexual dissidence and memory, often erased from history, such as sex workspaces and cruising spaces, sanitized and policed by previous mayors. SinVergüenza therefore mobilized in creative and political collaborations outside the dance floor too, something that Hannah Baer explores in her 2021 article. Here is a flyer, take in mind that this is all pre-COVID aesthetics, co-produced together with Disidencia's 3,000 collective against neoliberal austerity policies pushed by the International Monetary Fund, a global government in the US. In the last few years, since the Ecuadorian government took a right-wing shift around 2018, there has been a significant increase in poverty levels. And in 2019, October 2019, Ecuador, which successfully saw measures imposed by the International Monetary Fund, also known as IMF. There was no SinVergüenza party edition during that month, but the government imposed a curfew at 8 p.m. to control a protest led by the Ecuadorian indigenous movement, which were joined also by unions, feminists, and transfeminist Marica collectives. The protests were labeled as terrorist and anarchist, and anti-imperialist geographies highlight how night space is often framed as a time of fear and danger, a narrative that is used to justify increased surveillance and security measures, particularly in the global south and marginalized urban areas. Derek Gregory explains how nighttime raids and other forms of military intervention in night space are often justified by the need to combat terrorism or maintain order, in quotations. This framing of the night as a time of geopolitical control reinforces imperialist power structures. By the way, months before October 2019 protests, Ecuador obtained military equipment from Israel and the US. Despite the success which was used later to stop the protests, though, which were labeled as I already mentioned. Despite the success of the protests, in 2020, the government used a panic generated from COVID to enable the economic measures without finding resistance in the streets, as people were fearful to meet in public and get the virus or be sanctioned, as Raúl Preciado warned us in 2020. The economic measures imposed by the IMF, together with the harsh economic effects from the pandemic, made the middle working class shrink significantly. Many DIY queer collectives and parties disintegrated or lowered the frequency of their events, while the ones which survived were mainly those catered to middle-class gays. SinVergüenza ended as a project in 2020 with COVID. Starting that year, a few sporadic small parties and attempts of parties have taken place under the name of Discrecionn. Video visuals touched upon issues like sex work rights, campaign for a referendum called by Quito Sin Minería Collective, which successfully prohibited mining in the cloud forest near Quito. And the last edition, among other, included some artistic visuals calling for queer solidarity with the current genocide taking place in Palestine. This last edition of Discrecionn, this is the flyer, planned for January 2024, however, had to be canceled due to a government-imposed curfew in response to some mediatic cases of narco violence. When SinVergüenza started in 2017, Ecuador was the third safest country in Latin America in terms of homicides per capita. How did narcos penetrate Ecuador in the first place? At the point of having to cancel a party due to it. The rise of poverty as a result of COVID, and especially due to measurably hurtful IMF imposed economic decisions, was the perfect scenario for transnational drug cartels to enter the country and specifically in vulnerable neighborhoods, recruiting impoverished and marginalized youth. In January 2024, the country went through a wave of mediatic narco-related violence cases, which were affecting the government's popularity. So to give an illusion they were doing something, calm social anger, the government imposed curfew, once again, just 3 days before the party. The government hence used panic associated with drug cartels as an argument for people to accept new control and surveillance measures. The government also declared a state of emergency, which granted more powers to the military. Doing the party during the daytime before curfew was still risky, as the military could enter the venue, which is an abandoned school in the historic district, and target those bodies looking suspicious in quotations, which are disproportionately which would be disproportionately exposing racialized and transgendered party attendance. As Puar mentions, policing and surveilling racialized and marginalized communities, particularly in urban areas where the night is associated with criminality and deviance. Anti-imperial geography emphasizes night is often a site of heightened militarization, especially in regions under occupation or conflict. The night becomes a time when states and occupying forces impose curfews, conduct raids, and restrict movement using the cover of darkness to exert control over populations. Drug cartels, by the way, existing as a result of the United States imposed war on drugs policy in Latin America. The US is the biggest market of drugs consumption in the world, but has a punitive prohibitionist approach toward drugs. And this has created an illegal economy in Latin America known as cartels and narcos. While the US global empire maintains this drug policy imposed in America, the war on drugs, there is no short or medium-term solution for the violence it causes. In other words, Nighttime Spaces is not only about vínculos and connections between bodies, artists, collectives, and communities, as well as social movements, but also about geopolitical connections and vínculos with global and regional policies like the war on drugs in Latin America. Should I stop?
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's